Most plants are built to grow fast, reproduce fast, and die fast. That's the industrial model, and it works for about one season before the whole system collapses. But there's a completely different category of plant out there, built on opposite rules, and some of them are still alive from before written language existed. We're talking about organisms that figured out something most living things never do: how to survive everything. In this video, we're going through 10 of them and looking at the actual biology that makes that kind of lifespan possible. Number 1, Bristlecone Pine. The White Mountains of California sit above 10,000 feet, and the soil up there is basically decomposed granite, thin, cold, and almost completely without nutrients. Temperatures swing hard enough to split rock. Most plants die in their first season. The bristlecone pine has been growing there for over 4,000 years. And here's what the data actually shows. Those brutal conditions aren't killing it. They're why it's still alive. Plant a bristlecone in good soil with reliable water and it grows faster, but it also dies faster. The stress is the mechanism. A hostile environment forces the tree into a metabolic crawl, producing growth rings so thin you need a microscope to count them. And that slow growth builds wood so dense and resin-saturated that fungi, insects, and bacteria simply can't break in. Number 2, Giant Sequoia. The Giant Sequoia plays a completely different game. Where the bristlecone stays small and stressed, the sequoia gets so large that most threats stop being relevant. A fire that kills every other tree in the forest barely scorches the outer bark of a mature sequoia, because that bark can grow 2 feet thick and contains almost no flammable resin. It's a biological firewall. But most people miss the next part. The sequoia doesn't just survive fire, it actually needs it. Heat from a ground fire opens the cones and drops seeds onto ash-cleared soil below. Fire isn't a threat to reproduction. It's the trigger. Number 3, Coast Redwood. The Coast Redwood stays within about 50 miles of the California coast, and it's not because of soil or temperature, it's because of fog. These trees pull a significant portion of their water directly through their needles from coastal fog, and that's the only reason they can grow over 300 feet tall while the surrounding region goes months without rain. Getting water that high pushes the limits of plant physics. Root pressure and capillary action alone can't do it. Foliar water absorption from fog fills the gap. Remove the fog, and the math stops working. Redwoods also sprout new growth from dormant buds buried in the trunk, called epicormic buds, that activate after fire damage. A tree that looks completely dead after a fire can push new branches from the main trunk within a single growing season. Number 4, olive tree. There are olive trees in the Mediterranean that were already old when Rome was still a village. They don't get there by being spectacular. They get there by being nearly impossible to kill. Cut one down to the stump and it grows back. Burn it and it grows back. The root system stores enough energy to restart the whole above-ground structure multiple times over, so ancient groves that look untouched have often been destroyed and regrown from the same roots more than once. Number 5, yew tree. Ancient cultures planted yew trees in graveyards, and it turns out that wasn't just symbolism. Nearly every part of the tree is toxic. Bark, needles, seeds, the wood itself, all of it contains alkaloids that interfere with cell division in animals. Livestock deaths from yew ingestion are still documented today. The tree poisons its way to longevity. As the central trunk ages and hollows, the yew drops aerial roots from its branches into the soil, building new structural support to replace the failing core. A very old yew doesn't look like one tree. It looks like a cluster of fused trunks that have been rebuilding themselves for centuries. The Fordingal yew in Scotland carries an age estimate somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 years, and that range is wide because the original trunk has hollowed so completely that ring counting doesn't work anymore. The tree outgrew our measuring tools. Number 6, baobab tree. The baobab looks wrong. The trunk is absurdly wide compared to the canopy, sometimes 30 feet across, and the bark feels slightly spongy in a way that normal wood doesn't. That's because the trunk isn't primarily structural. It's a water storage organ, and a large baobab can hold tens of thousands of gallons in that tissue, which is how it survives in semi-arid savannas where droughts stretch across multiple years. The trade-off is that water-storing tissue is soft, so the interior hollows out over centuries, leaving a living shell around a cavity big enough to walk into. Some have been used as shelters and bars. During dry season, the baobab drops its leaves completely, which is why it's sometimes called the upside-down tree, those bare branches pointing skyward like roots. So it's running two buffers at once. It stops spending water through transpiration and draws on internal reserves until rain returns. Radiocarbon dating confirms some specimens exceed 1,000 years, with reports of others approaching 2,000. But in the last decade, several of the oldest known baobabs collapsed or died, and researchers connected that directly to accelerating drought conditions exceeding the range this tree evolved to handle. Number 7. Dragon's Blood Tree. Socotra Island sits in the Arabian Sea, isolated enough that roughly a third of its plant species grow nowhere else on Earth. The dragon's blood tree is the most striking of those, with a trunk that splits into a flat, inverted umbrella canopy that looks engineered rather than grown. And it basically is. That canopy shades the soil beneath the tree, cutting evaporation, while simultaneously catching coastal fog and channeling water straight down to the roots. It's the same fog harvesting strategy the Coast Redwood uses, evolved independently on an island thousands of miles away. Cut the bark and it bleeds dark red resin, which seals wounds, blocks microbial invasion, and slows water loss from damaged tissue. The tree reproduces only under very specific microclimatic conditions on Socotra, and overgrazing has stripped away the ground cover those conditions depend on. Shifting monsoon patterns are changing moisture delivery in ways the tree's slow growth rate can't keep pace with. A species that survived millions of years of geological isolation is now under real pressure from changes happening over decades. And its highly specialized adaptations, the fog canopy, the resin defense, the minimal metabolism, are all calibrated for a stable environment that's becoming less stable every year. Number 8. Sacred Fig, Peepal Tree. The Sri Mahabodhi in Sri Lanka was planted in 288 BCE, and it's still alive. That's not legend. That's a documented cultivation record spanning over 2,300 years, and it survives partly because communities considered it sacred, which meant nobody cut it down. Ficus religiosa often starts life as a strangler fig, germinating in another tree's canopy and dropping roots to the soil until those roots fuse into a self-supporting lattice. If one root pathway fails, dozens of others carry the load. In humid conditions, branches send aerial roots down that become additional trunks, so one tree can expand laterally into what looks like a grove. A relative in the same genus covers over 4 acres as a single individual. Number 9. Creosote bush. In the Mojave Desert, there's a ring of creosote bush called King Clone that's estimated to be 11,700 years old. It doesn't look ancient. It looks like a shrubby ring of desert plants about 70 feet across, and every single stem in that ring has died and been replaced multiple times over. The root system carries the original DNA, and every new stem grows from it as a clone. The leaves are coated in waxy resin that does 2 things. It cuts water loss and chemically suppresses competing plants in the surrounding soil. That same resin actively kills bacteria and fungi around the root zone, so the organism has been running a continuous chemical defense operation underground since before agriculture existed. Number 10. Welwitschia mirabilis. Welwitschia mirabilis grows in the Namib Desert and spends its entire life growing exactly 2 leaves. Not 2 sets of leaves. 2 leaves total, for up to 1,500 years. When European botanists first described it in the 1800s, they couldn't agree on what kingdom it belonged to. Those 2 leaves are its entire water collection system, pulling fog and dew directly through the leaf surface in a desert where rain might fall fewer than 25 days a year. The frayed, tattered look of old leaves isn't damage. It's continuous growth from the base while the tips die back, building a dense mat that maximizes fog contact.